Over a period of 3 centuries, the European colonization of North America systematically displaced Native Americans through governmental and church policies that led to a sharp decline in the population of Native peoples and the geographic and social isolation of millions. From 1492 to 1650, 106 million natives on the North American continent were systematically eradicated from their land. In the early 1800s, manifest destiny and the prospect of striking it rich with the gold trade motivated settlers in the United States to expand their presence further west, which led to encroachment upon native land. Through this expansion, indigenous tribes were forced to relocate, which often ended in violence and the displacement of native people. Though efforts to displace Native Americans were constant and systemic, they were not met without opposition. Encroachment upon native land was sometimes met with organized resistance from tribes who fought to preserve native territories and traditions. In an attempt to disrupt Native efforts of resistance, the United States government sought new ways to acclimate natives to the notion of American culture. If Native people would not surrender to the United States, perhaps they could be assimilated into American culture. The approach to assimilation spurred the Indian Civilization Act Fund. The funding for this act was provided to missionaries to educate and convert Native Americans to Christianity. Initially, 32 boarding schools sprang up to support this endeavor, growing to 52 schools by 1830. That same year, after many treaties had not been honored by the U.S. government, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act. This legally allowed the government to forcibly remove tribes from their land. Over 60,889 Native American children were taken from their homes and families and forced to attend boarding schools. These schools and institutes were backed by the U.S. government and by Christian churches. The government funded the churches to build the institutes, and then the churches would assimilate Native American children to the Western culture and Christianity. Boarding schools in the 1800s ran like military boot camps and even had military personnel as part of the staff. These boarding schools were located on reservations or near Indian land. Indian children were allowed to go home each day or on the weekends. This, however, proved to be counterproductive to the end goal. The Indian children were still holding on to their native language and culture because they were still practicing it. In 1879, the first Indian boarding school purposely located away from Indian land was founded. The school was called Carlisle Indian Industrial School, and it was located on a military base in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. The school was founded by a Civil War second lieutenant turned educator named Richard Henry Pratt. His new model isolated children from their culture and community and allowed his school to attempt to fully assimilate Native children into American culture. This policy was later adopted by several governments such as the United States and Canada as Kill the Indian, Save the Child. Children were forcibly transported to the school by railway, often threatening their families with violence or withholding food and resources. Many Native families sent their children to these schools unaware of the events occurring within them. Others sent their children out of fear of retribution if they did not. While attending Indian boarding schools, children were made to cut their long hair, which was an aspect of Native identity. If they spoke their native language or practiced anything relating to their culture, such as songs, dancing, or prayer, they would be severely punished and used as an example to show other children what would happen if they did the same. They endured many different types of abuse, such as kneeling on broomsticks, being locked in closets, and being beaten with belts by the teachers. Yvonne Walker Keswick and her siblings were sent to Holy Childhood of Jesus boarding school by their father. He was given the choice to either send them to a boarding school or have his children split up and put up for adoption to non-Native families. After making his decision, he was charged with child neglect. This tactic was used by the government to justify their actions to the public. Here, Keswick shares her experience.
I spent a lot of afternoons, lunch hours, staring at the blackboard because I couldn't do the problem on the board. And one day she'd come back and she'd find me still standing there and the problem was not done. She would grab me by my hair and use me for an eraser, drag me back and forth across the blackboard, till she erased the numbers.
In the 19th, not all children had the same experience while at boarding school. Some Native students remember their years at boarding school fondly and made lifelong friends while attending. They were also exposed to formal education, sports, and useful trades. Even those Native children who had a negative experience had some benefits due to attending boarding school. They were able to better assimilate into American culture, therefore they were more readily accepted by society. They were also able to get jobs or continue to higher education. Many of the famous Native American code talkers who contributed to the military communications intelligence during World War I and World War II had been students at Indian boarding schools. Although they were punished for using their native language, the military-style schooling prepared them to transition easily into military life as adults. Dr. John Molina, director of the Arizona Advisory Council on Indian Healthcare, is Pascuayaqui and Yavapai Apache. He explained in an interview that although boarding schools were a traumatic experience for many Native children, others benefited from attending. Dr. Molina states, Our children were unfortunately assimilated to a Western way of life, but gained the opportunity of education. He goes on to explain that this afforded Native children a path to professional careers which they could then use to serve their communities. Dwight Howe, a student of Chilocco Indian School, illustrates this perspective as he shares his experience.
It was an exciting feeling to be 14, 15, coming to a campus where there was all kinds of Indians. And it created a sense of Indian nationalism. So I think the school kind of started that awareness, that changing of my paradigm of thinking about who I am, who my people are.
There were 526 government-funded Indian boarding schools throughout the United States in the 19th and 20th centuries. 125 of these schools still exist today as reminders of the history and struggle that the indigenous people had to endure. In present time, many actions have been taken to help restore and revive Native American language and culture. The Indian Civil Rights Act was created in 1968 to preserve Native American culture. Another act that was passed to protect indigenous Native American people is the Indian Child Welfare Act. This act was created in 1978 to help Native American children who were forcibly taken from their homes and sent to live with non-Native American families. This act attempts to find any living relatives of their family for reunification. Many federal and governmental agencies provide funding and services for Native American tribes and communities to compensate for the damage, trauma, and pain that these boarding schools caused indigenous people. One example of this is Sherman Indian High School located in Riverside, California. The school's original name was Paris Indian School because it was located in Paris, California at the time. It was built in 1892 as one of the boarding schools away from the reservation. In 1903, businessman Frank Miller argued to the school board that there was not an adequate water source by Paris Indian School and the school should be relocated to Riverside, California. Miller hoped that the relocation of the school would draw more tourism to his inn. Once the school was relocated to Riverside, it was named the Sherman Institute after James S. Sherman, who was a congressman that heavily funded the school and supported the act. The Native children did indeed draw tourists and they were used as free labor. The school went through several iterations over the years but has remained open. In the 1960s, parents began protesting for the curriculum to better reflect indigenous language and culture. In 1971, the school was accredited by the Western Association of Schools and Colleges and was renamed Sherman Indian High School. Today, the school is operated by the Bureau of Indian Education/Bureau of Indian Affairs and the United States Government Department of the Interior. Its mission is to provide a safe, caring environment in which a balanced program will foster the academic, social, cultural, physical, and spiritual growth of a diverse population of American Indians in an off-reservation boarding school for post-secondary success. In 2021, Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland began a review of federal boarding school policies. Not only did they report on the harrowed history of boarding schools, but they focused on identifying cemeteries and burial sites. Secretary Haaland stated that the goal was to address the intergenerational impact of boarding schools to shed the light on the traumas of the past, no matter how hard it will be. After the Department of the Interior published its second and final volume of this review, President Biden issued an apology in October of 2024. He called the government's involvement with the Indian boarding schools a blot on American history. Today, Native American people have reclaimed their right to language and culture. According to the National Coalition of Native American Language Schools and Programs, many school districts with large populations of Native American students are beginning to provide dual language classes including a few different indigenous languages. Traditionally, powwows were healing ceremonies led by elders. In present times, they are a display of Native American culture meant to pass on the legacy and tradition of song and dance to each new generation. As Senator Haaland stated when reviewing the history of Indian boarding schools, "I know that this process will be long and difficult. I know that this process will be painful. It won't undo the heartbreak and loss we feel, but only by acknowledging the past can we work toward a future that we're all proud to embrace."